And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 152nd episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, July 28th, 2020, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. On the docket for tonight, a few weeks ago, we had our annual summer series where we go through each class and we talk about the football and basketball programs. And each episode, we do a specific class and basically how each athlete in that class can contribute towards this upcoming season. So a few weeks ago, we lumped the freshmen and the sophomores together since, of course, it's a little harder for freshmen to contribute on the field, at least statistically, as much as some of those upperclassmen. So we lumped the freshmen and the sophomores together. So go listen to that if you haven't already. It was, I think, 4 episodes ago. And this week we're jumping on to the juniors, and we're going to talk about that and possibly some ancillary things since, in the summer, and especially with COVID-19, information's just coming in and out. So some weeks there's a lot of information, new information at least, to talk about. Some weeks there's not. So here with me tonight, if you hadn't heard, I know we talked about it in a few podcasts recently, and you haven't heard Matt on the podcast in a few weeks now, and he moved out to Wyoming, towards Yellowstone and kind of that whole area, because there's a bunch of national parks there, the Grand Tetons, all of that, to kind of work. And so he's been really trying every week to try and get on, but it hasn't been working as much. But there's a chance that he might be coming back to his home state of Florida relatively soon. So we'll see when we get him. You'll just be pleasantly surprised when he's able to come back on. But here with me tonight is the dynamic duo that's been holding down the fort most of the past few weeks. Nathan, how are you doing? I loved your podcast last week, especially with last minute standee John coming in for you to help out.
Yeah, it was really fun, and yeah, shout out to John for helping us last week. It was a little chaotic, but we had a fun time last week talking about some IU sports news and played a little Would You Rather. But I'm really fired up for tonight's show because we're going to be talking about the junior class for both the football program and the men's basketball program, and there are a lot of key players and important names and numbers that you guys have to know if there's any sort of football or men's basketball that takes off this year. I was just doing some research, over the last 24 hours, and it's incredible how a lot of these guys have an astronomically high ceiling or a very frightening and concerning floor. So it'll be fun to dive into each guy. Yeah, we'll see what's up with Matt, as far as the weeks to come are concerned. But I highly recommend that all of you go see his fire Instagram post right now, because it's just all sorts of great pictures of national parks and states like Montana, stuff that the Kardashians don't show you if you follow them. So super excited about Matt's future, super excited about our podcast that's warm and sunny outside. What more could you ask for? Oh, wait, there's probably a lot right now, but let's not get into that.
We'll do that as the social media shout out. Nathan, great segue. We'll shout out Matt's Instagram, Matt Lukens 12, no spaces or underscores, 2 T's for Matt. That's Matt Lukens 12, all together, no underscores or capitals, 2 T's for the Matt. He does have a lot of really great stuff. So let's get into some of that this week. So we're going to start with the football class like we did. And again, we're assuming we're having for now, I guess we'll assume a 10-game conference-only schedule, and then we'll get into the basketball side of it, which is going to be an interesting topic of discussion, because when I was going through this, I had just completely blanked that, hey, there's only 2 junior basketball players, scholarship or walk-ons, for this entire roster. But before that, in between, I'll also talk about, there was, long story short, basically a virtual press conference with Archie Miller today, and about 4 or 5 of the athletes that I was able to sit on, and I'll kind of talk about what was said there, since that was not an interview / press conference open to the public. All right, let's start with our IU football juniors, and let's start with the QB position. Nathan, this is probably the easiest one we've had so far, because it's a big old goose egg for probably the juniors that will be contributing with the QB class.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, Penix and Tuttle not in this grouping here. Peyton Ramsey off to Northwestern, although he would have been a senior this year as well. So there's really no discussion. We can keep moving on.
Exactly. There are actually a couple, not too many, a couple position groups that really not many people will be doing. And the next one is a very small but very important class for the juniors, and that's the running back position. And of course, the most obvious one is going to be starting running back Stevie Scott the third. I don't think we need to even go into. It's kind of like those couple top key players in the freshman and sophomore classes. This is a guy that, of course, is going to be very huge for Indiana. We talked about with the freshmen and sophomores how there are no senior running backs. So really the backups are coming from the freshmen and the sophomores. So we talked a lot about how you've got a bunch of backups there, a bunch of capable guys that are able to come in. They're not Stevie Scott level, but they're able to keep contributing, which means Stevie Scott's not going to have to be the main guy 100% of the time. He's not going to have to be the Tevin Coleman or the Jordan Howard of a few years ago to be able to still contribute to this team. So I could still see Stevie Scott necessarily not wowing you on the stats per se, but still being very impactful because he's going to be a guy that's going to get you those ground pound type of numbers, kind of put it up the hole. He's not a guy that's going to juke you a crazy amount, but he's going to get those first downs for you. He's going to get those touchdowns, and also it's going to be an interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see how Stevie Scott is used in the third IU offensive coordinator in 3 years. This is his third offensive coordinator as a junior. Hopefully we'll be able to keep him for the same offensive coordinator for 2 years for Stevie's sake, but it'll be interesting to see how he's used in a new system.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that. It's true for all the juniors, I guess, on the offensive side of the ball. It is their third coordinator. Stevie Scott, though, he's not a home run hitting running back, but there's a lot of stuff that he does that catches my attention, whether you either watch him on TV or in person. I was doing a little digging, and I noticed that over Stevie Scott's first 2 seasons, there are only 2 running backs in the Big Ten that have had more games with a rushing touchdown than Stevie Scott. You want to take a shot? Noah? Put you on the spot. The 2 Big Ten running backs over the last 2 years that have had more games with a rushing touchdown than Stevie Scott.
I don't want to be put on the spot for that.
No worries. It's 2 guys that were drafted in the NFL just this past April, J.K. Dobbins and Jonathan Taylor, right? I mean, those 2 guys were faced off against each other in the Big Ten championship game last year. Those 2 guys were extremely hyped up as far as pro running back. Those 2 guys were really hyped up as pro running back prospects, even in a position that's kind of struggling right now overall. Stevie Scott's third. He's had 15 games with the rushing touchdown the last couple of years, and the other thing when you watch him in person, he's if this is one thing he can improve on in his final 2 seasons at IU, it's making that final move. It's beating that last guy down the field, not necessarily with the sprint speed, but with a juke, with a stiff arm, with a spin move, something to stay in bounds, evade that last guy. You might see him elevate those rushing yard totals from around 1,000 yards to 12 or 1,300 yards, and all of a sudden you'll see a lot of NFL scouts, raise their eyebrows and say, "Wow, this guy's a gamer." But even if he doesn't do that, he's the running back that's put up 1,000 scrimmage yards total each of the last 2 seasons, double-digit touchdowns. This was someone who wasn't really a heralded prospect coming out of high school, out of Syracuse, New York, and now he's the workhorse running back in the IU backfield. Samson James is there. Some other interesting freshman prospects are there as well, but Stevie Scott is the first down, second down running back at a bare minimum. So he's really important. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what he's going to do in this upcoming couple of years.
For sure. And also with you talked about the NFL aspirations, at least as for him, and he's got at least 2 more. Well, I say at least 1 to 2 more years, depending on what he wants to do, of eligibility left. And for the NFL specifically, Stevie Scott is not a guy that I guess you would associate pass catching as a running back necessarily as much. So for him, and that's where the NFL is going, the running back, as a few players recently have been proving, at least with, not necessarily proving, that's a bad word, but showing that the contracts for the running backs in the NFL, the running back is sadly in the NFL currently getting devalued by a lot. It is going down very far for running backs, and the only way to keep it up is to basically become what Christian McCaffrey is doing, where he's getting passing catches, passing yards, and running the ball at the same time. So Stevie, in order to get to the NFL, he's going to have to open up his pass catching game even a little bit. He doesn't have to be Christian McCaffrey, but he's got to at least show that he's a threat on the field, that he can catch it and run down like a wide receiver or a tight end in order for him to get noticed by some NFL scouts. The wide receiver group, basically nothing. It's going to be your seniors and your freshmen and sophomore. There's a couple guys we could say if there are injuries and stuff, but really there's no one at all in the wide receiver group. Would you agree, Nathan?
Yeah, I would. The one note I wanted to mention there, Cam Wilson, the junior receiver, he had some real personal tragedy during this offseason, but all indications are that he's making some type of sort of emotional recovery from that. It's never easy to go through that type of stuff when you're young, but he's got a really good room of receivers here in Bloomington, hopefully helping him out.
Exactly. That was the one guy I would have mentioned if we talked about much of the receivers at all for the junior class. The next position group for the Hoosier football team, I would argue probably you could argue for the most important junior class. I'd probably put them at second, but it is the tight end position. And the tight end position for the junior class, the tight end group for the Indiana Hoosier football team is juniors. It's Redshirt junior Peyton Hendershot and Matt Bjorson, to where those are really the only, we talked about on the previous podcast with the freshmen and the sophomores, how all of those guys were basically backups, and they would only see time really if Peyton Hendershot is not able to play this season. But since then, the news came out that we talked about, I think 2 weeks ago, that Peyton Hendershot is completely cleared with the team, the university, the judicial system. He is completely cleared. He is playing the whole season, whatever that season looks like, and he's back with the team. So all of that doesn't matter at all. So really, it's just Hendershot and Matt that are the two guys that are going to be the workhorses for the tight end group. And like I said, I would put them first if this next group in the or at least two groups in the defense on the defensive side didn't have so many junior starters, but really this tight end group is crucial for the offense, at least in terms of the junior class.
And that and that almost undersells it in a way, because one thing you've seen out of IU's offense since the start of last season was getting those tight ends involved more. And I know Kalen DeBoer moved on to a head coaching job at Fresno State, but fully expect Nick Sheridan to continue using the tight ends effectively. It's the way the NFL is going nowadays. Peyton Hendershot's going to be really important for IU this season. Don't overlook Matt Bjorson, though. He's got your tight end build that you need, Midwestern guy from the Chicago area. I like this combo, and the one thing that we've mentioned a few times on our podcast over the last handful of weeks, if not months, that continuity and chemistry that you have with your teammates, especially in your same position group with football, is going to be very important this season, especially in a conference-only schedule where you don't have any cupcake games except Rutgers. The thing is, when you have a grouping like Hendershot and Bjorson, and of course TJ Ivey, who's been there now for at least one full season, he's not in the junior class, but if you have that continuity, that's going to really help your team this season. So with Michael Penix, cross your fingers, hopefully playing a full season, Peyton Hendershot should see an uptick in his numbers, and if he does, the next level is going to be calling.
and you don't have to sell to me the importance or the talent ability of Peyton Hendershot. As I've said multiple times, I've been the president of his fan club ever since day one that he stepped on the field, and I think people even undersell him as much as that. I feel like that's even possible as a tight end. He's a guy that if he keeps on this trajectory that he has, where he's just getting better and better each year, if he keeps it up and he doesn't plateau, he's going to be a guy that could potentially see him into the third, second, or even first round as an NFL draft pick, which is just crazy because usually you don't see tight ends get drafted that high whatsoever unless you come from the school up in Iowa. The last group of the offense is the offensive line, and there's one main guy and a couple of backups. The main guy is going to be Caleb Jones. He's a redshirt junior. That's kind of the most veteran offensive lineman on this Hoosier team. You've also got, and I actually say two backups. I forgot. I was lumping Dylan Powell as a backup. The grad transfer who has 2 years left of eligibility, so really we're lumping him in was kind of with, it's not really freshman, sophomore, junior, seniors. It's really just first year, second year, third year, fourth year, kind of like those schools that are kind of weird. And we're not going to call you freshmen. We're going to call you first years. But it's Caleb Jones and then Dylan Powell, the grad transfer. Like I said, those are going to be two guys that are going to be starters on this team. And then you've got Britt Beery, who's going to be basically a backup at a couple positions and really more of a backup of a backup. He's a couple people down, but really can't oversell the importance of Caleb Jones, especially, like I said, the leadership that he's going to bring, since he will be the most veteran offensive lineman from this team.
Absolutely. I mean, Caleb Jones arguably is one of the 3, maybe 5 most important players on the entire football team, because for most schools, the NFL teams, the right tackle isn't the blindside tackle, but Caleb Jones is playing that position for IU, and he is the blindside tackle because Michael Penix is left-handed. If you've scoured the deep dredges of Twitter the last few weeks, there has been some big-time NFL draft buzz surrounding Caleb Jones. They're really thinking he can elevate himself to a top 3 round NFL draft selection, top 75 type player with a great season at IU. And look, the guy, his size is more than qualifying him for the NFL. I mean, he looks like a different species when you walk past him in Bloomington. He's an Indianapolis kid, so it's always good to see those in-state guys deliver for IU and then advancing to the next level. Keep an eye on Caleb Jones all season. Assuming it gets off and going on time. Caleb Jones, starting right tackle. Make sure you know who he is, because if he has a great season at IU, he's going to be someone to look out for in the NFL.
Which is crazy because normally offensive linemen aren't those people that leave early. They're usually ones that will stay all 4 years, because even if you're on draft scout radars, which in a lot of the other positions, if you're even on an NFL scout's radar after your junior season, a lot of them basically go to the NFL, compared to the offensive linemen, where even if they're on the radar for the NFL scouts, they still do their senior season to still get it up even more, because you just never know. And that's crazy to think that a guy like that is already on scouts' radars after only 2 years of physical on the field play. And that's even if he comes back for his senior year, then that's just crazy to think. And with the offensive line position in terms of IU football and the NFL, that's probably the position that has had the most success in the last decade. The Hoosiers that have been drafted, not just in the top 3 rounds, but even just been drafted, the offensive line Hoosiers are doing very well. A lot of them are physically starting, not just in the league trying to find a team. They're physically starting whether they were drafted in the 2nd round or all the way into the 4th or 7th round. The Hoosier offensive linemen that are drafted are doing well. So just to keep going on, again, like you said, how important Caleb Jones is for us.
And look, I don't want people to be surprised when you watch. He's 6'8", 360 pounds, you guys. I mean, you can't miss him when you watch him.
No.
And he's agile too for that size. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really excited to see him next year.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And let's move over to the other side of the ball. There's a couple of pretty key prospects, and they're not necessarily the guys that might get you all the numbers, especially with nose tackle James Head Jr., but he's that starting guy. He's the guy that's in the middle most of the time. He's really worked his way up into the starting lineup. He wasn't a highly touted recruit. He was a guy that's done a lot of the dirty work, and he gets the job done, basically. And again, nose tackles, you're not going to get a lot of tackles. You're not going to get a lot of sacks. It's the guy that is your almost traditional, which is why the nose tackle is almost going away, just because of the agileness that you need to be on the defensive line with the way the NFL is evolving. The nose tackle traditionally is just supposed to be the biggest guy to plug up as much space as he can so the running back isn't able to get through. But he's a guy that's really made his way into not just being a solid defensive lineman, but a guy that's he's gonna be relied on a little bit in the on that front seven. And then you go over to a little farther out, not necessarily defensive end, but not nose tackle. You got Demarcus Elliott, a guy that I talked about on the last one or a few episodes ago when we were talking about sack numbers. And I think that over-under episode we did with all the numbers are going to have to be taken down a little bit now that we don't know 12, 13 games. But Demarcus Elliott, a guy that has really showed last year that, again, before last year, people didn't know what the name Demarcus Elliott was. This year, he's a guy that he's going to be relied on in order for this defense to keep continuing to try and improve and not slide back from where Tom Allen had it when he was the defensive coordinator. And then the last one, Redshirt Jr., Alfred Bryant. He is a good depth player. He's not going to start, but like we talk about again on the last Freshman Sophomore episode, defensive lineman is a key position that uses a lot of bodies, so he's still going to see time whether or not he's starting.
Yeah, a couple things there. I wouldn't expect Head to be the nose tackle for IU. He's a little slim for that position. I expect Sio, our friend Sio Nafoa Gatatoa, to be the nose tackle for IU and starting there. But those players that you mentioned with James Head, even Alfred Bryant, I could see them making an impact. I love James Head. He had 2.5 sacks last year. He's a player who I think has the athletic ability to become one of the best defensive linemen, if not even, one of the best defensive players on that side of the ball for IU. And by the way, Demarcus Elliott is in that same exact conversation. You've got a couple of guys who have the ability to jump up and bat balls down. They have a good nose to snuff out those screen plays. They're able to stop the running game. If they play each play correctly. James Head and Demarcus Elliott are two guys that if they are making the improvements right now during the offseason, they can really elevate IU's defense into being one of the most dangerous in the conference. But on the flip side, if they're not putting in that type of effort right now during the offseason, or if they're having some sort of off the field, issue or difficulty right now, and they either plateau or even regress, you're going to see opposing Big Ten teams either ground and pound the Hoosiers to death or have all day in the pocket. Like I remember seeing a couple of IU opponents have last year, namely Michigan. I remember Shea Patterson a few times had all day to throw, and that's what helped Michigan get a big win over the Hoosiers. So when it's all said and done, James Head and Demarcus Elliott, to me, are two of the most important players on the defensive side of the ball. We know what we're going to get with a guy like Tywan Mullen. He's an outstanding corner. Even though he's going into his sophomore season, we know he's outstanding. Elliott and Head are going to be really important for IU this upcoming season. And don't be shocked if Alfred Bryant makes a big play or two, either this coming season or the season that follows, because he's got the physical traits. It's about putting it all together in Big Ten play.
For sure. And the defensive side of the ball, the junior class for the defensive side of the ball is the biggest class, probably overall the biggest class. I would think that is almost, I would go as far to say, potentially make or break this team season, because there are just so many key players on the defense, whether it's somewhere down in the defensive line or the linebackers or into the secondary. There are just so many of them that are key contributors and key starters for this team. And it also makes sense because you think about this junior class, whether they're true juniors or redshirt juniors, this is about the time where Tom Allen, all those years back, was a defensive coordinator. He got in, he showed that he did something, and then he got those recruits because they were like, hey, I want to come play for this guy that turned this defense around. That's the product we're starting to see from when Tom Allen was really changing this entire, not just the defense, but now the entire program. This is the kind of that's why we see so many juniors basically here compared to where it would typically for a Hoosier team be those seniors. And moving into the linebacker group, this is the group that I would say next to the tight end group, and that's why I was saying probably put him at number one for the most overall impactful position group, is just because it's all juniors for this, the quote unquote traditional linebackers, since I know it gets weird with technically if you're sometimes a defensive end player is an outside linebacker, and then you've got the Hoosiers that use the Husky position that is a hybrid linebacker and secondary man. So the traditional actual linebackers, it's Micah McFadden, Cam Jones. Those are the two starters that are going to be really this entire team. And then you've got another guy with redshirt, Thomas Allen, of course, the son of that head football coach, a guy that you would think technically is a backup, but when you actually watch games, you see this name Allen on the back of a jersey coming up on a lot of big plays that it's hard to believe that he's actually technically quote unquote a backup. So he's also another really, really important guy. And I'm going to, Nathan, since I just mentioned that Husky position, I'm just going to lump, since we've got a lot of secondary players to talk about, I'm going to lump Bryant Fitzgerald, the backup Husky position, which is he's going to be the backup to Marcelino Ball, into the linebacker group, even though he's kind of a fluid group. But Micah McFadden, Cam Jones with Thomas Allen, and then Bryant Fitzgerald, this is a really important linebacker group.
It's really deep too, and McFadden led the team in tackles last season as a sophomore. I mean, to have the confidence from your head coach to trot you out there as many plays as McFadden is out there on the field as just a sophomore is a real tip of the cap to Micah McFadden, and he's going to go into his junior season next year, and he's going to try to pick up where he left off. He's going to try to raise those tackle numbers from 60 to, who knows, 80, if you're talking about even a 10-game slate. So I wonder what kind of individual goals McFadden has for himself, especially considering Raekwon Jones has graduated, and Raekwon Jones is a pretty important piece in that inside linebacker group. Outside of McFadden, Thomas Allen, since he plays a similar position to McFadden, we'll go to him next. Before he suffered his injury, Allen was a pretty interesting player. And he's a versatile guy, can be moved around a bit. Allen intercepted Nate Stanley when Iowa came to Bloomington a couple of years ago. He had a couple of nice games against Ohio State and against Maryland last year before the injury. If nothing else, Indiana's kind of built their program like some of the real powerhouses in college football, where if Micah McFadden gets hurt, well, then you have some depth that you can call on in Thomas Allen to play some snaps without really losing too much of a step. Cam Jones is a real fun player to watch. Outside linebacker, he had a pick 6 against Rutgers. He's somebody who is just scratching the surface with his athletic ability, and he's got 2 full years to go still in Bloomington. Cam Jones is someone who, he's got a little bit of everything. I'm not saying, I don't know you're a Steelers fan, and I'm not saying he's Joey Porter, but he plays a very, I'm not saying he's Joey Porter for those of you who followed the NFL from, 5-10 years ago, maybe more now. It's all blurring together.
Longer. It's more like 15 years.
15, man. It's all everything's coming together. But that type of outside linebacker can play the run, he can play the pass, he can guard the tight end, he can guard the running back out of the backfield, he can jar the ball loose and pick it up and those fumbles and pick passes off and take them in for a touchdown. He can rush the passer, drop back in coverage. I mean, he can really do a lot. And Brian Fitzgerald's the last guy, and I'm not sure what exactly to expect from Fitzgerald as somebody who, played a fair share of snaps last year, but he's more in the defensive back mold than the defensive lineman mold as someone in that Husky position. So don't be surprised if he's responsible more so than somebody like Cam Jones. Don't be surprised if Fitzgerald has to play more of a coverage role. Remember, Marcelino Ball also plays that position for IU. So good depth, good athletic ability, as well as different skill sets that Tom Allen can have a lot of fun with.
For sure. And I think specifically with the backups, we talk a lot about in that freshman, sophomore class backups that could see the field. I feel like, first of all, there are not a lot of backups, period, in this whole junior class, but the ones that are backups, I feel like they're really good key depth pieces, like you said. And with the uncertainty of COVID-19, we're seeing in the MLB that potentially, depending on, again, this is a really fluid situation because all the Marlins and the Phillies, literally, as we're recording Tuesday, just had all these positive tests. But theoretically, if they're able to figure out a way to keep playing with a couple positive tests and you're able to quarantine and everything, you could have guys here and there coming in and out of for this entire season, even with whatever the season is. So like you said, if Micah McFadden goes down, you've got a really capable guy in Thomas Allen technically to step up, even though he's already been stepping up and playing a bunch of minutes. Same thing with Bryant Fitzgerald. These are not guys that I would worry if they had to take over for technically their starting position. Now, moving into the secondary, you're going to have to bear with me, Nathan, and bear with me, audience, because there's a lot of them. And I'm going to give you at least last year we had an idea of who the starting secondary would be. That drastically changed as the season went on, as you saw just how the young guys were able to really prove themselves. So I'm just going to start with at least a group of starters / backups to those starters because it kind of works out that way, and it's not going to be 100% fluid, but you've got the strong safety probable starter in Devon Matthews. You've got the probable free safety starter with Jamar Johnson and his backup Juwan Burgess as a redshirt junior. You've got cornerback Reese Taylor, who has finally found a position group after playing, it feels like, every position on the football field. And then you've got Jalen Williams. No, not the basketball guy, Jalen Williams, but you've got the backup to Reese Taylor as Jalen Williams. Yes, I think those are the five guys that you will see definitely in the secondary during this upcoming season.
Oh man, yeah, I'm not gonna go into each one of those guys. Here's the deal: if you don't know who Jamar Johnson is yet, get to know him. He's somebody who had 2 picks for IU last year. Fun note, by the way, last year Indiana had 7 interceptions. All 7 were by somebody who's in the upcoming junior class, which is super interesting when you think about it that way. I expect Taiwan Mullen to break that trend next year, but Jamar Johnson is somebody who waited 11 full games and then some to get his first pick. And then, how about this timing? He picked off Purdue quarterback Aiden O'Connell in the IU end zone, stopping a Purdue scoring chance. And then he just, got a pick 6 in the bowl game against Tennessee. So pretty solid work there by Johnson in the bucket game and then the bowl game. He's somebody who's not just somebody who gets a couple interceptions. Pro Football Focus, as well as others, have touted him as somebody to keep an eye on for. And once again, we're mentioning that NFL word with this junior class, somebody to keep an eye on when he does decide to make his move to the next level. So Jamar Johnson, he wore number 22 last year, I believe, played safety. Keep an eye out for him. And Reese Taylor, that's somebody who, Mr. Football, formerly from Indianapolis, Ben Davis High School. Not sure initially where he was going to be best for IU, but, he seemed to really find a nice role as the corner opposite Taiwan Mullen. And that as starting as the corner opposite Taiwan Mullen, what does that mean? If you think about it, that means every single offensive coordinator is going to try to get the ball to the receiver that Reese Taylor is covering, because you're not throwing it to the guy that Taiwan Mullen is covering unless Taiwan Mullen slipped and fell. So that's the interesting thing with Reese Taylor this year. All of a sudden, he's the guy that people are going to try to target rather than the guy people are going to circle in their game plans to try to defend. It's an interesting adjustment for Taylor, but he's another one of those players in this junior class that if he is making the improvements that he needs to make and he can elevate his play from his sophomore year to his junior year, look out, because again, he has the physical tools to be great in the Big Ten and even in the next level.
Another very key position group for this Hoosier defense that wants to break through that top 25 and be considered a top 25 defense, not just once every few years, but basically from here on out, and try and be the reason that this IU football program is changing. And it starts with this junior class. James Head, Demarcus Elliott, Micah McFadden, Cam Jones. You can throw Thomas Allen in there, Devon Matthews, Jamar Johnson, Reese Taylor, all guys that are going to be starting and making a difference. And that's a lot of names that I just listed. That's basically, depending on how you kind of move in and out that defensive lineman and some of the secondary, that's basically more than half of the entire defense that's going to be starting for you that's making a difference. And so this junior class is really focused on that defensive position group, and it just gets you excited because we talked about a bunch of really great guys that then get ready for not just this year, but get ready for next year too, as they can do the stuff on the field, and then they can also pass that down to the next generation and hopefully break that barrier for IU football to consistently be better than they have been as a program in general. Special teams. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You're good.
Okay. All right. Special teams. And that's why I said go ahead, because there's not much there at special teams. They've tried Reese Taylor out at punt return, but he's probably not going to be the guy. You could see him maybe once or twice there, but special teams, there's not a kicker. There's not a punter, and there's really no guys that are going to be returning either punts or kicks. Would you agree?
Yep. All correct. Reese Taylor is the backup punt returner if Wap Fillier is out or needs a breather or whatnot. We saw Reese Taylor return a punt or two, either against Penn State or against Purdue. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's basically full of either seniors or youngsters, which can be good and bad, I guess.
Yeah. All right. We put out a poll in preparation for the podcast, and we talked about, hey, vote in the poll for who you think will be the most impactful person in the junior class for this upcoming season. And again, you can only list 4 names. So I listed Stevie Scott, Peyton Hendershot, Cam Jones, and then other, because of course we talked about someone like Caleb Jones, and really it's just not 4 spots left. And hopefully the people that voted for other was the one than him. The competition pretty much squarely in Stevie Scott's favor, 71%. Peyton Hendershot has 20, Cam Jones at 6, and other at 3%. The only thing I would argue is I think Peyton Hendershot should be way higher up on that list, since we talked about how Stevie Scott might not necessarily get you the stats. I think Peyton Hendershot is a guy that can do all of it, and he can really break out a game. He's the kind of player that can actually he's that it factor, the guy that can you plan for all these other guys, but you don't really plan for a tight end guy, and then he's the guy that can really make a difference in terms of big plays and blocking on the field. So,
yeah, and I'll even mention the third option there, Cam Jones. I think 6% right now is too low for him.
Agreed,
as somebody who plays such a key role on the defense as that outside linebacker. It's almost like the tight end of the defense, if you think about it, the jack of all trades type of thing. I'm not saying maybe he should be the most impactful junior in this poll, but 6% is too low for a guy that has as much responsibility as he does.
And usually with all the COVID stuff, we don't necessarily know. Usually that's a guy in that position is going to be the team captain and the guy that's calling the plays or at least receiving the plays. So that's another really important leadership position as well. So I totally agree with what you said. I think Stevie Scott has a little too much credit for some of the other juniors in this class. All right, Nathan, give us who won the week.
Yeah, so I'm excited for this one. This is one of my favorite who won the weeks, really, this is probably one of my favorite Who Won the Weeks that I've done since really our this segment started. It's going to be Kayla Berger, the left-handed pitcher for the San Francisco Giants, who made his major league debut back on Saturday. for the Giants at the Los Angeles Dodgers, and he pitched 2 spotless innings and got the win. So fun story here, if you can spare a minute. Berger was a pitcher for IU back in 2015 after transferring from junior college. Left-handed guy, mostly a starter at IU. Then, credit to him, he had the skill and ability enough to where he could go to the pros. But he was really struggling. He was struggling in A-ball, double A-ball. But for some reason or another, one of the Giants pitching coaches or perhaps minor league coaches got to him and suggested a change in his pitch location, pitch movement, based on analytics. And Berger really took off over the course of the last few months. He was in Double A last season. I think he got the winning out in the Double A Giants championship series. And still, the expectation wasn't for him to be in the major leagues, but he didn't even qualify for the Giants spring training roster back in March. Yet, because of the improvements he made, and unfortunately for San Francisco, a couple of pitchers testing positive for coronavirus, he was selected for the summer camp that they had over the last week or two, made the opening day roster, and then the first 5 guys he got out, how about this? It was Max Muncy, Mookie Betts, Cody Bellinger, Justin Turner, and Corey Seager, which is like, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but it's probably $300 or $400 million in salary just right now that he retired as his first 5 hitters. I don't think it'll get any tougher for him the rest of his career. What a way to start your Major League Baseball career. He absolutely won the week.
That's great to hear. And if you don't follow the MLB very much, that's an eye-opening list of batters to basically get out. Let's move into the basketball portion of this, and we'll try and make it somewhat brief just because, again, like we said, there's only 2 guys there, but I did want to mention a little bit about the press conference, basically the Zoom press conference that was held just earlier Tuesday evening. And if you go over to Indiana HQ, you can kind of find a couple quotes that we had from that specific press conference. And speaking of, this is probably a great time to still update you on our Twitter account, and it's still basically staying strong with not much word from Twitter or any help at all. The past month or so, Twitter's kind of been going in and out in whether it was intentional or not, and kind of doing some weird things with shared social media accounts. And it's not just one of us that kind of does the Hoosier Sound Twitter account. It's a bunch of us. So right now it's still on lockdown. No, we didn't necessarily do anything wrong. When you go see the account, technically it's account suspended. It's happening everywhere. Our founder, basically Rob, he says his own Twitter account that he does a lot of stuff with people too is gone. And of course, about 2 weeks ago, you saw the Twitter hack where celebrities were also, a lot of those blue checkmark celebrities were locked out of their account, and their account was suspended as well. So I was looking that it kind of goes away after a month. It's been a month, but still no word yet. So sorry, guys. Really, just Indiana HQ, bear with us. But speaking of, since you're going to Indiana HQ anyway, if you're not following them, that gives you all the quotes that kind of a bunch of people had. And Archie Miller talked for about 25 minutes before having a couple questions. It was like a post-game press conference, basically. Archie Miller went for a little while, and then you had a couple questions from Joey, Al, Race, Rob, and Trace. Those were the 5 guys that answered some questions and some of the highlights. Basically, I don't want to give it all away. Archie talked about basically all of the summer workouts that have been going on, and long story short, he is wildly impressed and grateful and blessed, and all of it with just how all of the summer stuff has gone for his team and for IU. He talked about how you see a lot of college programs having to pause their voluntary workouts, even on the other side of the sports complex area for IU, with the football team having to pause voluntary workouts temporarily. The basketball team, he said, we've had a really great 5 weeks. The guys have been doing really good on and off the court because, again, you got to stay healthy when you're not on the court for those or in workouts and stuff. And right now they're planning for basically things coming back normally, at least quote unquote normal. But of course things are basically a pretty fluid situation. They started bringing back players this summer in 2 groups, and basically that initial group kind of paved the way for how that second group was coming back and how they came back very successfully. Archie Miller talked about some guys. One of the main points, he talked about Christian Lander, how he's reminder, hey, he's 17 years old and he's only been on campus for 3 weeks, so we got to be patient. But he's really gifted. He's got that it factor and the ability to know how to play, which he's like, that's something you can't really coach. So he's just got to improve his physical condition, of course. And then also he says the main thing besides the physicality is he's got to learn how to make mistakes and not get too far down when he makes a mistake. So that was an interesting thing. Joey Brunk talked about the 4 new guys. He said each and every one of them competes. They enjoy being at Indiana. They enjoy the process. And he thinks everyone is going to contribute at some point during the year, which I think is really interesting. How first we all love the Indiana guys, and then how they're all going to contribute this year. Durham, Al Durham was asked his standout player for over the summer, and I really thought this was a cool answer. He said Race Thompson. Race Thompson has stepped up tremendously this year or this summer. He's more outspoken, and he's taking guys under his wing. So the basketball side is coming for it, but he is emerging as a leader on this team, which is probably not something we would have predicted on the outside looking in. Rob Finnessy was asked a question, and I think he accidentally alluded to something that he may or may not have, but he said that basically IU was they're kind of doing a new offense. So we'll talk about that in later podcasts, but Finnessy said that there's a new offense coming, which, of course, the offense basically, long story short, as we all know, hasn't really been working the past couple of years. So there's a new offense, and it's going to include more ball screens. And then he kind of stopped talking because he probably shouldn't have expounded on anything else. And the last thing I want to mention also that I thought was important, Trace Jackson Davis, they asked him about what he's been up to, and he says the summer he's been really working on his jump shot and stretching the floor. In quarantine, he's just been shooting the ball, which is really great. If you could see all of what he did under the basket and around the basket, then at the perimeter, that's the kind of thing that scouts are like, all right, let's not only move you into the first round, let's move you into the first half and into the lottery. But that was kind of a couple really cool points. Do you want to talk about any of those points before we get into Rob and Race?
Yeah, 2 things stand out to me. First of all, in general, it just seems like the IU basketball program is raring to go, even though the season is, ideally, if it's on schedule, about 3.5 months away. They seem like, based on the comments that Archie and the players made, seems like they're ready to go. And
that was
it's going to be tough for IU every night. If they do play a full season, because you've got a high-profile Big Ten ACC matchup, like almost definitely on the road. You've got a Gavitt Games matchup against the Big East team. You've got the Maui Invitational, which we'll see if it goes off without a snag. And then you have a rough and tumble Big Ten schedule. So, I'm glad to hear that Archie and Trace Jackson Davis, too, are looking to add a wrinkle or two to the offense. The other thing that caught my attention was Rob Finnessy's mentioning that they're going to try to incorporate more ball screens. Look, the last thing you want to be in the Big Ten, especially with so many great coaches in the conference, and I don't need to list them all. You guys know who they are. You don't want to be predictable. So if it means you can throw in a couple of ball screens, you can take a couple of jump shots with your forward stepping out a step or two, that's going to be really helpful for IU in the short run and the long run.
The last thing I forgot to mention, which is important, they asked Archie about kind of what his outlook on what the next season is going to be like, and he said, quote, or at least somewhat close to what he said exactly, was that he would be shocked if there was not some sort of basketball season, and that he was talking about how whether it's a regular season as is or if it's conference only, he listed a bunch of different things, but he would be shocked if there was not a basketball season. Now take it with a light grain of salt, because he's in a bubble of his 20 or so personnel. They've been extremely successful. That hasn't been the way the whole country's been going. You add on the fact that the MLB and outside bubble organization is now finding COVID tests and how they're going to react to it / how everything's going to happen with all of that. There's a lot of work to be done, but that's at least from what Archie's getting as of July 28th, almost August. It seems like basketball is at least, again, long time away, that basketball is going to be okay, at least to have some sort of season, which is great news. All right, our two juniors, and again, like I said, the only scholarship and walk-ons. There's no walk-ons to even talk about if we wanted to. Is Rob Finney, Race Thompson, and as I pull up the thought process, one of our contributors had when I mentioned that, it was kind of jarring at first that it was like, hey, there's really no juniors that are on this basketball team, because basically what happened was, remember, Romeo got drafted, Demezy just transferred, Jerome technically was supposed to be in that class, but then the health stuff put him technically back into the sophomore class, and and then Jake. So then so that's basically why we're at 2 people instead of what it would have been like 8 people. But I think the way to go about this, Nathan, is we had a poll on Twitter as well. Who do you think is going to be more impactful? And this one was easy. There was only two answers. But what do you think? Is Rob or Race going to be more impactful? Because you got Rob as a guard.
Yeah.
That, of course, we really need that strong guard play. But then you've got Race Thompson that if he keeps getting better like we wanted him to this past season, he's a guy that could really make or break at least how far Indiana could get at the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw our Twitter followers under the bus again. I would go with Race Thompson here. Rob Finney has about a 70 to 30% lead right now over Thompson, and I disagree with that. I'm going with a minority here. At this point, and I want to get your thoughts on this too. The way I look at it is Rob Finney's kind of a known commodity at this point. You know, we know what we're going to get with him, that 7 to 8 points per game, couple rebounds, few assists. We kind of know what we're getting with him. Race Thompson has shown at times, whether it's the Wisconsin game from a couple years ago or a few different contests from last season, he can be one of the most dynamic players for IU, front court or back court. And I remember from last season, especially in Big Ten play, there were more than a few times Thompson led the team in plus minus when you're really looking at, it's a stat that generally tries to show the impact of a player on the team. So I'm leaning Race Thompson here. I expect him to really step up. It's good to hear that he's taking a leadership role as well off the court. If he can elevate his game even a little bit, I really like the potential impact he can make for IU next season.
I'm gonna have to agree with you too, and I think it kind of just solidified my thinking when I heard earlier that Race Thompson was really taking a leadership role. We forget how much of a factor leadership plays into a successful season or not, because when the Crean years where he was having those successful seasons, you had a leadership guy like Yogi taking the team by himself, and you hear coaches interviews all the time after they're done or whether they're still in the job saying the success of their team is because it's a team-led, it's a team-focused program that a coach just kind of helps them along the way, whereas usually the other way around, where it's a coach-focused program, usually doesn't do as well as that team-oriented aspect of it. And when you've got not, I guess, a strong candidate like Yogi being, this is for sure the 100% the face of the IU basketball program for this season, you really need guys to be able to step up and have the impact like someone like Yogi had when he was on the team. And seeing that a guy like Race, maybe a few weeks ago or a month ago, you wouldn't have maybe expected to be that leadership guy. Really, when Joey's giving him praise and he's the guy that everyone's looking up to right now, saying that he's becoming a really good leader, that's really important for this team. Even if he's not able to contribute on the court like we've wanted him to keep progressing as, but which I don't think would happen. I think he's going to keep progressing. But even if that doesn't happen, I think the experience that he has, because remember, this is going to be his 4th year on the program as well, because he came in and redshirted because he came a year early as well. That's just going to be really key for him. And I think more of Rob is extremely important. I just kind of, in my thinking, was putting him more, I expect him now as a guy that had a successful freshman season, an injury an injury-ridden sophomore season, a guy that I expect him to do well this year. I expect him to lead this team on the court, like guard leading the court, not necessarily leadership. I expect him to lead this team on the court, and I expect him to do what he's supposed to do. But I think Race is able to have that impact that we might not have been able to see at least a few months ago at the end of this past season.
Yeah, the potential is there with Race Thompson. The proof is there more with Finney.
Yeah,
and it's funny you mentioned Yogi Ferrell. I think for a moment there at the start of the 2018-19 season, we thought maybe Finney was going to be that guy. And look, like you said, he's going to be important for this team. I think Rob Finney has a reputation for being sort of a quieter player, right? With Christian Lander coming to campus a year early, I want to see a fire lit inside Rob Finney to be the guy. I want Rob Finney to practice and eventually play like he's the starting point guard at Indiana University, and he's going to show every single Hoosier fan and every single teammate of his that they can get along for the ride. I mean, that's the type of motivation I want to see Rob Finney play with this upcoming season. If he hasn't, gone on mission starting point guard yet, I guess he's got a little bit of time. But hopefully, once the season ended back in March, and especially once he heard Lander was coming to Bloomington a year early, hopefully that sort of lit that fire under him to really pick it up and get going.
That's a great point, and I don't want to take anything away from his work ethic the past couple of years, but there is something different. No matter how hard you work, there is a different feel for how you practice and how you play when there's competition next to you. And Rob hasn't had a lot of competition. He's had some, but he hasn't had a player that has been really, I guess, pushing him to his limits. And I feel like Christian coming in, like you said, is a guy that Rob's spot isn't in jeopardy. I'll make that clear at least first. His spot isn't in jeopardy, but a guy with Christian coming in, and even though Christian is not necessarily going to take his spot, if Rob doesn't come to show and he doesn't come to keep improving, Christian could start taking his minutes away and start taking his role on the team away, because that's what we ultimately, the way Christian's skill set and attitude and ability, he's the guy that's going to be the main focal point on a team, the guard that is going to be able to really churn a team and lead a team as a traditional guard would. And Rob becoming a junior, he's going to be a guy that, like you said, maybe that fire, hopefully Christian coming in, is going to be able to help elevate him to what we have always wanted him to be. I'll basically mention as we're ending here, we will talk more about all of the specific basketball players more in depth. Like I've said, if you missed our last podcast with the freshmen and sophomores, we've got time to talk about it. We always dedicate an entire episode, more than an entire episode, so multiple weeks, to talking about lineups and the specific players as the season gets closer and as we get a little more information, like some of those press conferences we had today. So don't worry, we're not going to spend just 15 or however many minutes on basketball. We'll be able to dive in depth more a little later. But for today, that's going to wrap it up for 152nd episode of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you all so much for joining us. Of course, thank you to the live audience for coming out and participating in the chat. Really appreciate that support, news, and updates. Indiana HQ Twitter as of now, but subscribe on YouTube, because hey, we go live. You can come chat with us every Tuesday evening. Most importantly, though, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review. Easiest place, Apple Podcasts, Facebook, but tell a friend. That's how we really grow our podcast. Share a link so we can reach all those passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation.